The Mamluk bombardment of Acre, the last Christian stronghold, has breached the outer wall. It is May 1291. For weeks the city has suffocated on dust and fear. Now, the final defense is broken, and the air fills with the sounds of iron striking iron and the roar of the sea below. Thousands rush toward the harbor, a chaotic press of merchants, knights, and mothers dragging children through the smoke. They flee the specialized Mamluk Halka regiments pouring through the breach. A woman's hand grips a small, polished object in her pocket, an olive wood cross bought years ago from a pilgrim. It is smooth, worn, and now useless. The harbor is a trap, the escape ships already overcrowded or burning. The accursed tower has fallen. The city was a fortress of faith, the last bastion of Outremer. Now, it is only a slaughter yard between the stone walls and the indifferent sea. Why did the final defense collapse so quickly? And what fate awaited those who were not killed in the first hours of the sack? The city's covenants were broken. The age of the crusade was over. If you enjoy these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe and comment below where you're listening from. And now, back to the story. The smoke over Acre thinned to a gray haze, revealing the true cost of the city's fall. The harbor was silent, save for the lapping of water against hulls filled with the dead. The salt spray mixed with the iron tang of cooling blood. On the ash-strewn beaches, the survivors were roped together. The Mamluk guards, efficient and indifferent, separated the columns, men and boys to one side, women and girls to the other. The sounds of resistance had long faded, replaced by the cold precision of processing. The march began, away from the familiar sea, inland toward the alien heart of Mamluk power. They walked for days. The coastlands gave way to rocky hills, then to sun-scorched plains. Dust coated their faces, a gritty mask of dried sweat and tears. Thirst was a constant rasping torment. They were no longer the wives and daughters of merchants, knights, and craftsmen. They were Sabi, captives, human spoils of a holy war. They were property, their value yet to be assessed. In a dusty-walled caravanserai miles from the coast, the sorting began. Herded into the central courtyard, the gates barred, they were stripped of their heavy, blood-stained gowns and jewels, their last tangible links to their former lives. One woman, her hands bound, still clutched the small olive wood cross in her fist. Its edges bit into her palm. As a guard noticed her clenched hand and moved to wrench it open, she bowed her head in seeming compliance, brought her hands to her face, and transferred the cross to her mouth. She swallowed the small, hard token. It burned its way down, a cold stone of defiance, a secret kept in the dark. Scribes, balancing ink pots on their knees, recorded their entry. Not by name, names were a luxury, a connection to a dead past. They were noted by description. Frankish woman, young, strong, 1. Frankish girl, child, fair-haired, 1. They were marked, numbered, entered into a ledger like livestock or sacks of grain. They were no longer citizens of Acre, they were inventory. A quiet, desperate resistance flickered. An older woman, seeing her teenage daughter pulled aside by a guard, walked deliberately and placed herself between the girl and the man. She did not speak. She did not plead. She just stood. A silent, unmoving refusal. The irritated guard shoved her hard to the ground. The woman rose slowly, spat blood and dust, and returned to her daughter's side, taking her hand. It was a gesture of complete futility, but it was hers. How does the mind survive when the body is a cage? Then came the mercy. An emir, an officer from the Sultan's own Halka regiment, arrived. His armor was immaculate, inlaid with silver. He walked the lines, his gaze sharp and appraising. He was not looking for strength for labor, but for lineage, for fair skin, for the bearing that betrayed high birth. He selected several dozen women, including the older woman and her daughter. An interpreter explained the great honor. They would not be sold in the brutal, chaotic public markets of Damascus or Aleppo. They would not be sent to the grinding, short life of the mills or the quarries. They were chosen. They would be taken south, to Cairo, to the household of the Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil himself. This was presented as a great salvation, a rescue from the degradation of the common souk. the chosen women felt a cold, thin dread. The price of this mercy was unstated, but it hung in the air, thick as the dust. This was not a reprieve. It was a different, more permanent kind of capture, a gilded cage from which there was no escape. They were saved from the sword only to be buried in silk. The stone walls of Cairo were ancient, suffocating, and absolute. The surviving women of Acre, those deemed worthy of the Sultan's mercy, were brought to the Dar al-Haram, the house of the Harem. It was a city within a city, ruled by women, guarded by eunuchs, and owned by one man. There was no crude violence here. There were baths of scented water, chests of silk gowns, and plates of sweet fruits. This was the first tool: seduction. An older woman, the kahramana, or chief administrator, explained the new reality. She spoke through an interpreter, her voice devoid of emotion. Their old lives were ash, like Acre. Their old names were forbidden, their old god irrelevant. They were property. But, she explained, property could be cherished. They would be given new names. They would learn the language. They would be instructed in the faith. If they pleased the Sultan, they could gain status, security, even power. If they converted, they could one day command rooms like this one. The condition was clear: comply and be comfortable, or refuse and be erased. One by one, the women were renamed. Alice became Zainab. Marguerite became Samira. They wept, but they accepted. Then the kahramana stood before the woman who had swallowed the cross. You will be called Masara, meaning joy. Repeat it and renounce the failed god who abandoned you. The woman, whose name had been Lucia, met the administrator's gaze. Her voice was quiet, cracked from thirst, but it did not tremble. I am Lucia. I will not. The escalation began. First, the soft pressure ceased. The silks were taken. The fruits and warm bread were replaced by a bowl of thin gruel and stale water, delivered once a day. Lucia was moved from the opulent shared quarters to a windowless cell, barely large enough to lie down in. The floor was cold stone. The deprivation was meant to break her body, but the true weapon was silence. She was left in total darkness. Days bled together. No one spoke to her. The other Frankish women, terrified, were forbidden from approaching her. The kahramana warned them, "Her defiance is a poison. It will cost you this peace." The silence was an acid, meant to dissolve her identity, to make her crave any human voice, even the voice of her jailer. But the darkness was not empty. What was meant to break her became her armor. In the sensory void, her mind grew sharp. The silence, intended as a punishment, became her vow. The starvation, intended as torture, became a religious fast. She had nothing left to see, so she looked inward. She could feel the small, hard lump of the olive wood cross still inside her, a cold, indigestible point of truth. The kahramana finally returned, weeks later, expecting to find a broken, sobbing creature begging for a new name. She found a woman made of stone. Sitting upright in the dark, her eyes clear and calm, Lucia was weaker, thinner, but she was not broken. She was forged. This refusal exposed the true why. The Mamluk Sultanate was a dynasty built by slaves who had murdered their masters and seized a throne. They were rootless. This mercy was never about compassion. It was about strategic absorption. The price of survival was total erasure. The Sultan didn't just want their bodies, he wanted their bloodlines. By forcing them to convert and bear his children, he would consume the Frankish aristocracy, breeding their lineage out of existence and replacing it with his own. The children of these women would be Mamluk, loyal only to Cairo, their mother's past a forgotten whisper. Lucia's refusal was not just a rejection of a name, it was a rejection of this parasitic legacy. It was an act of war. The kahramana stared at the defiant woman, her face hardening. This was not a failure of persuasion. This was a flaw in the inventory. She left without a word, the heavy door grinding shut, sealing the cell in absolute darkness once more. The institution could not tolerate a witness. Lucia was never seen again. She vanished from the harem's records, a ghost erased by institutional silence. The other Frankish women, now bearing Arabic names, learned the language, wore the veil, and bore children for their Mamluk masters. The assimilation was, from the outside, total. Years passed. The Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil was himself assassinated in 1293, the Mamluk dynasty consuming its own. In the chaos, Harem life was disrupted, loyalties shifted, and old routines were broken. One of the converted women, Alice, now known as Zainab, had gained the trust of the new Kahramana. She was quiet, efficient, and never spoke of her past. She had seen Lucia's defiance, and in the intervening years, that image of cold refusal had become her own secret, an inner core the harem could not touch. She was tasked with sorting an old storage room, a dusty mustada filled with discarded ledgers, broken furniture, and robes of women long dead. The air was thick with the smell of dry rot and forgotten spices. While wiping down a stone shelf set deep into the wall, her fingers brushed against a loose, chipped piece of plaster near the floor. It was out of place. Curious, she worked at it, her nails scraping until the block of stone behind it shifted. It was not a hiding place. It was a grave. Behind the stone was a small, dark cavity. Inside lay a single object, a small, crudely carved olive wood cross. It was not Lucia's, but it was just like it. Tucked beside it was a folded, brittle scrap of parchment. This was not a list of inventory. It was a testament. Alice, Zainab, looked around. The room was silent. She did not pray. She did not weep. She picked up the cross and closed her fist around it, feeling the familiar, sharp edges against her palm. It was a wordless rite, a transfer of memory. She was no longer just Zainab. She was Alice again, a witness. She unrolled the parchment. The script was faint, written in Latin, the ink a faded brown. It was a list of names: Lucia, Maria, Agnes, Marguerite, Isabella, their real names. Beside each name, a single word was written: Conversa, converted, or Constantia, steadfast. The hidden truth was illuminated. Lucia had not been alone. Her defiance was not a singular, suicidal act. It was part of a silent, organized resistance within the harem walls. The Kahramana had not been fighting one woman. She had been fighting a secret pact. Records from the Vatican archives, centuries later, would cautiously corroborate this. Letters from hidden priests in Egypt spoke of lost flocks and women held in the palace who maintained their faith in secret. A hidden church within the Sultan's own walls. The list was the proof. The women marked Conversa, like Alice, were not just cowards, they were the shield. They moved freely, protecting the Constantia, the steadfast ones like Lucia, who were starved, beaten, or vanished into cells like the one in the storage room. Lucia's name was at the top, and beside it, the word Constantia. She had not broken. The cross was not hers. It was a marker left by another to prove that she had been there, that she had been real. The harem's mercy was a lie. Its true story was a war of whispers. Alice, now Zainab, placed the loose stone back into the wall. The cross was now hers. The parchment, that fragile list of names, she held over an oil lamp. She watched the light flicker through the thin vellum, illuminating the word Constantia one last time before the edges blackened and the ink turned to gray ash, indistinguishable from the dust of Acre. The names now existed only in her memory. In the official ledgers of the Sultan's household, the pages are pristine. Where Lucia's name should be, there is only smooth, unmarked parchment. No ink was spilled for the defiant. No record was kept of the Constantia. The institution had erased them perfectly. The whispers of their resistance never reached Europe as proof. The Vatican letters remained filed away, cryptic notes from a distant hostile land. Genoese merchants, returning from the markets of Cairo, told tales of fair-skinned, high-born women glimpsed behind the veils and lattices of the palace. But these were dismissed as sailors' stories, fantasies of men dazzled by the wealth of the Mamluk court. The women were ghosts, their history written in invisible ink. Zainab lived to be an old woman. She outlasted sultans, a survivor who had learned the rules of the cage. In time, she rose to become the Kahramana herself. She managed the inventory, she assigned the new names, she enforced the silence. One evening, she stood at a high, latticed window, looking not at the sea, but at the sprawling, dusty city of Cairo. She felt a small, hard object in the pocket of her silk robe. the olive wood cross taken from the wall. The stone, she thought, doesn't splinter. It endures. The fall of Acre was not an event that ended in 1291. It was a process. It was the slow, patient grinding down of one identity and its replacement by another. The Mamluk dynasty had taken their bodies, their names, and their children. But in a dark cavity behind a loose stone, a small piece of wood had held the line. Subscribe, hit the bell, and like. The archive is silent, but the stone always remembers.